What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thinking Market. Today, we are going to be discussing what may be considered my most important podcast episode. This is the technicalities, the economics and philosophy, or political philosophy, if you will, of anarcho-capitalism, or anarchy, the politics of anarchy, and the economic system of capitalism, and what this system essentially is. So let's begin with answering a couple questions. What is anarchism? Anarchism is a negation of political hierarchy. That means historically we've had kings, we've had rulers, we've had political leaders, presidents, politicians. Anarchism essentially is the philosophical perspective that these people are inherently illegitimate. Just because someone says, by the divinity of God, I am the ruler, or by, I guess, conquest, I am the ruler, or, which actually, now that I think about it, maybe the only legitimate ruler is by conquest, or by, because that's what politics is. Politics is power. And so that's why it's something that usually gets covered up via ideological support. Like popularity elections. If I don't want to participate, then this is kind of the idea of denying the legitimacy of a political ruler or president, if you will. Now, the question is, what is economics? Economics is another word for social cooperation. If you think of, well, the Greek meaning means household management, but in market interpersonal exchanges, this is, I think, the Greek word katalogon, or catalaxy, which is the idea of turning enemies into friends. People who are nothing like you, who have no values. You can have peace and harmony through the market process of exchange. And this is like the division of labor and specialization in trade. Then you have politics. Politics is power. I think if you study the Italian school of political science, which is like Machiavelli, the Machiavellians, it's the science of power. And to me, politics is turning friends into enemies. This is politicization. This is the politicization of society. Is who's gonna rule, who. And historically, we have had conquest, exploitation, enslavement, and that determined who the ruler was. Democracy came along and essentially was, okay, instead of going to war, let's just count the heads of how many people are on each side and determine who the winner would be this way. So politics is a science of power and its usage and dispersion over society. So these are some basic preliminary questions to consider when we dive into anarchy and power structures. Now, I want to explain 4 important pillars of anarcho-capitalism. So we're going to get into the technicalities. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm a spiritual anarchist, drugs should be legal, sex should be had, freedom should be dispersed. But then, like, obviously people are like, oh, that was me as a teenager, but I got older. And so there's, I guess if you want to call that spiritual anarchism, but then there's technical anarchism, which is based on the foundation of the science of economics, how markets operate, how two people exchanging. If I go into a hamburger shop and buy a hamburger, this is a form of anarchy. There's no third-party institution telling me that how I should buy a hamburger, what I should buy. This is, as Marx termed, the anarchy of production. This is the market society. So a lot of people ask, like, okay, well, how would anarchy work? What does day one of anarchy look like? And that's what I study, and I'm here to teach and explain, is what are the technicalities of anarchism. So there's 4 main pillars. The first pillar is private property. The second pillar is medium of exchange. The third pillar is jurisprudence, or justice. And the fourth pillar is security. So the first pillar being private property is the idea of human life. What is our body? What is the meaning of our life? What is our mind? If it's not owned by us, then who owns it? This is why all rights are property rights. If I own myself and the extensions of my life, then that is a form of private property. But not only ownership, but like maintenance of this ownership. Let's say hypothetically, I sold myself into slavery and I signed the contract that I don't own myself, I relinquish the rights of myself, then I would say that I'm not the property owner of my body, which may be a little bit abstract, so maybe that's not the best example. Perhaps a better example would just be slavery. Like, there's no private property of one's body if they are a slave. They're owned by someone else, they're ruled by someone else. So this is a negation of one's own personal private property over their body. But the human mind is really not something that can be controlled. I can't force someone to be creative and create magnificent works of art. So I guess when it comes to the importance and essence of private property, it's not just our body, but it's our mind and the idea that we have subjective values and we have subjective meanings. What may be the meaning for one person's life may not be the meaning for another person's life. I like that Albert Camus quote where he said, and I believe it was Camus, that whatever keeps you from killing yourself is the meaning of your life. So that can vary for a lot of people, obviously. And I guess when we apply it to the fact that we're social beings and interpersonal social cooperation, which is the market economy, is that I may specialize in producing something or working for something and I receive my income this way and I go to the market to buy what I like, the goods that I like, then this in essence is part of my private property. It goes into my capital accumulation. And this is the history of increasing standards of living and decreasing infant mortality, increasing lifespans, is that we can have capital accumulation. Capital accumulation or capital formation is, as Harper, I forget his first initials, said, capital formation is the greatest of all charity. Because with capital formation, you create what is the basis for a business that can employ other people so that you can hire them for a wage. And with wages, people have more income. A lot of people complain that like wages is like a form of like slavery, which perhaps is like a Marxist idea, but then the question you have to ask is like, okay, so what's the alternative? Just receiving money, like welfare or universal basic income, which would produce nothing. The only way that material standards of living improve is through production and capital accumulation and savings and investment and the profit and loss mechanism, where losers should actually be like thanked and appreciated because they're being told that what they're doing is a waste of resources and that they should be using those resources for something else. That's why the capitalist entrepreneurs receive profits. Profits is a signal from the market. Now, what we have in a crony capitalist system is people making money at the snap of their fingers for producing no goods or services, just printing money. And this is basically a scam of all the other producers and people working to make money, because then their money gets devalued by the people, the central bankers, politicians, who receive this money that's just been printed for nothing. They produce nothing, no net benefit to society. And this is what inflation is an increase in the money supply. So we can't really actually look at what we currently are living in these economic conditions as the theoretical example of a sound medium or a sound form of markets and private property. There's so many regulations. We have a regulatory state. Um, Everything is regulated. Look around you. Look how many products are produced. Consider like all the regulations they went through to get to the market. So the regulatory state, the administrative state, is really just like eating up the capital that's been accumulated. And this is actually like decreasing and hindering our society's ability to create more wealth. And even just putting $1 million in people's pockets and bank accounts wouldn't create any new car, any new services. Prices adjust. Prices would just go up. Um, Monetary wealth is not real wealth. Money is not like wealth. Money is a medium of exchange. So you have a purchasing power. That purchasing power is not necessarily determined. Um, Whatever the quantity is like sufficient. But if you just increase more of it, then each monetary unit, the value of each monetary unit decreases. So money is a different type of good where we don't necessarily want more of it. What we have is sufficient. What we want is increased productivity in material goods. That's what kind of drives prices down as we have more supply and we have, more demand for goods and services, then we can have more of these things like refrigeration, air conditioning, cars. This is not to say that capitalism is a perfect economic system and that material standards of living is what creates happiness. Happiness is a psychological phenomenon. I'm not saying that anarcho-capitalism would bring happiness. This is not what I'm saying. That's very materialistic. That requires a spiritual perspective and subjective meaning of your life and your ideas and your mind and your ability to be content. All I'm saying is that, anarcho-capitalism is not utopia. It's like curing cancer. You wouldn't solve all problems in society, but you would solve a major one, which is the parasitic entity that is the nation state, the regulatory state that just creates these bureaucratic industries that are more of net losses, to put it mildly, and net negatives for society than positives. So this is the idea of private property. You need to own yourself in order to own things, in order to create things, in order to produce things for other people, and in order to exchange them for other things that you want. All relies on private property. Now, the second pillar is medium of exchange, which I touched upon a little bit, but I will go deeper into. Money is what connects people as a language that is non-verbal. Money can create connections across the world to people who have no similar values. I can buy a pair of shoes in Afghanistan. They can take my money. I can take their shoes that they produced, and we're both better off because maybe they produce a lot of shoes and they're trying to sell some to make some money so they can buy other goods that they want. And I want a pair of shoes because I think they're really cool. And I think those shoes will make me cooler. So this is the significance of money, is that it, instead of directly bartering, say I produce pencils and pens, what if the people producing shoes in Afghanistan don't want pens and pencils? I'm shit out of luck. I gotta find something else that they want. So this is what direct barter was. And so it's resolved via, I use, like, let's say, paper clips. They want paper clips for some reason. So now paper clips becomes a medium of exchange for indirect exchange. I'm indirectly exchanging paper clips for what I want, and I exchange pens for paper clips. So it like indirectly gets me what I want, and they accept the paper clips. Hopefully someone else wants paper clips so they can get what they want. But money evolved as being like durable, divisible, commodable, like marketable. People know what it is. Rare. Paper clips probably seem to be able to be mass produced and copied, so that's not the best medium of exchange. So then historically it did become gold and silver, and then what happened was that emperors always tried to devalue the money or tax it to benefit themselves, and then they created paper money and this idea of a central bank. And so now the central bank, the Federal Reserve, is the monopolist of producing money. They're a state monopoly. Um, what we want is a separation of the production of money and the state. So a major revolution for human freedom was the separation of state and church. The next one will have to come with state and production of money, the denationalization of money. Because money, you basically get money for the energy that you not just exhibit. I don't want to say it's purely energy, but what's valued, the energy that's valued in the market. So like, let's say you make pens, the amount of pens you produce is one thing, and then the amount of pens you exchange and sell kind of is like the revenue or the profits. But if I'm like a laborer and not the entrepreneur who's makes their money off the profits and selling the pens, then my labor of like creating the metal clip of the pen or whatever it is, for example, obviously we know what like forms of jobs are, that money, that monetary income I receive, I use to buy other goods. So with money, we can have more specialization and complexity. And this is essentially like the lengthening of production structures and having more specialty, because money can kind of be used as a form of like temporal a temporal dimension to production. I can have money and invest it, and I can also earn it and save it, and I can spend it later. Whereas something like using like eggs or direct barter systems, there's kind of a temporal constraint on when I need to use my bartering power. Whereas with like indirect exchange, you can have savings and this capital accumulation for investment, and producing new goods and services and capital goods, more specifically, that can create more products, or yeah, create more goods, consumer goods, eventually. So this is kind of the idea of money. And again, with like fiat money or paper money or political money, politicized money, that really just goes into like whatever the government wants. So the military industrial complex, boom. We don't vote on that as citizens, and we're barely even taxed anymore. I mean, if we were really taxed to fund wars in the military industrial complex, I think there would be a lot less of it. But because they can print money, it's just a tax in the future, so it's scamming everyone by devaluing their money, and it's going to wars because frankly they have to spend this money in order to demand more of it. And so this is one example of the lines of things spot in the government production of money. So yes, you can't have full individual sovereignty without monetary sovereignty. Now, let's go to the third pillar, which is jurisprudence. What is justice? They said in, I believe it was France, before the revolutionary period, that, a punishment that was too severe was injustice. But a punishment that was not severe enough was also a form of injustice. So justice is kind of more or less an arbitrary determined concept, right? So if you're with some people and I come in and I slap you across the face, you may turn the other cheek. You may want to slap me back. You may want to slap me twice. You may want to punch me. That will be a subjective determination of justice. In a sense, it's arbitrary. You may be a pacifist. You may forgive me. But when it comes to things like crime, how should crime be determined? Because currently, the state, being a monopolist on courts, I mean, just think of the term Your Honor. Don't ever call someone a judge Your Honor, because that's a title of nobility. And we already pay them. But this is just a service. It shouldn't be such a sacred concept. Usually, historically, when disputes occurred in communities and societies, they would go to like the elders and the chiefs and ask for resolutions, people that were trusted in society. So this is a very normal societal institution and service that can be definitely produced in a strong community. But I think what we could have is more forms of restitution, which is the idea of payment and compensation um, towards victims who incurred a cost from theft or damages. So let's say I break into someone's house and I chop off their arm, and they lose, let's say, $100 million of potential revenue. Then maybe I would be put into a system where I would have to work to pay off this debt I incurred of charging someone $100 million for chopping off their arm. Or if I had that money, great, I pay it back, boom. I'm sure there would be other ideas of, how people would consider me in society if I did such a thing. But under today's conditions, we have what's called the prison industrial complex. So if I chop off your arm and this incurs you a cost because the job you were doing required two arms, I get imprisoned. And then I go to prison, you don't get paid, I don't pay you back, and then you pay me in the form of taxation for my stay in prison. Like years ago, it was like 60,000. I don't know what the current cost is. It's got to be 60, 70,000 plus dollars in the state of California for being imprisoned, because it's a bed, it's electricity, it's food, it's security. So you pay twice. You're a double victim. One, you lose your arm, you lose your money, and two, to pay for my imprisonment via taxation. So this is not a form of restitution, let alone what I would consider justice in my idea of it. And then you have this horrible system where people are treated like human batteries, where, oh, we got to fill up the prisons because people make money off this. And it's really unfortunate that that's what we have today, but that's what we have today. So, I think when it comes to things like rules or laws in anarcho-capitalism, it'd be like the rules of the property owners. If you go to a mall, there's rules that you have to obey or you get kicked out. And this goes into the fourth pillar of security, which is, private security. Now, we have a monopoly by the state. Again, I think it's important to kind of consider like the market, the society, as producing goods and services, and then the state comes in as like a external parasitic entity that just monopolizes some of the services, like security in the form of police and courts in their justice system, etc., etc. So in anarcho-capitalism, you'd have private security. And people are like, oh, that'd be expensive. It's like, again, using the mall as the example, the tenants, the shop owners, pay for security, trash cleaning services, electricity, and the customers buying their goods pay the tenants, and so this all gets paid for by consumers. And yet it seems to be a pretty safe place. When you consider like a bar late at night with drunk testosterone fueled men, it's a pretty safe place compared to the alley, the public alley during that same time. Because it's just an economic supply and demand situation where how much security should we have in society? Should we have one police officer? Should we have 10,000 police officers? Should they be roaming 24/7? Should there be peak load roaming hours that they should be out and watching and vigilant? In the form of a monopolization like the police, they're not responding to consumer feedback because they're paid via taxation, which means they're already paid, so their incentive is not as directly involved if they were a for-profit service for security. And this leads to such inefficiencies, um, treating people, citizens, surprisingly, not like they're their boss. Have you ever tried going up to a cop and being like, "Hey, you work for me"? That's a joke. Uh, so what you'd have is like private security that could take many forms. Maybe you're going somewhere, you want to call Uber, but instead of for a ride, it's a security um, ride service, ride sharing service, security sharing service. Uh, that sounds totally plausible. This is a market again. So I think with a lot of these ideas, like Professor Hoppe's analogy that, like, if we lived in a society where the state produced hamburgers and we had to consider what would a free market society look like in the production of hamburgers, that would be a little bit difficult. What flavors would they be? What toppings would there be? What varieties would there be? Who would produce them? At what hours would they be produced? What shapes? It's just something that only the millions and billions of minds of a market society is really best able to produce, because even the most intelligent person is ignorant to 99.99999% of knowledge in existence, and everyone knows something you don't. And so it's the arrogance to think that these ideas are not possible. I think it's the hubris and the humility and creative solutions, creative thinking to consider, like, oh, like, what could these things look like in a market? And that's just understanding economics. It's not even like a normative claim. It's literally just like a description of understanding from human action and like time preference, that we prefer things in the immediate future versus the in the immediate present moment than the future. Oh, I think my camera died. Um so damn, my camera really died. Okay, well, with that, let's conclude there, and thank you very much.